You've probably been told the same story over and over again, that retiring in America now means one of two things. Either you saved perfectly, invested early, and landed in some glossy retirement community with golf carts and monthly fees that quietly eat your check alive. Or you didn't. And now retirement means stress, roommates, or a quiet panic every time rent goes up again. But here's what almost no one says out loud. There are still towns in the United States where Social Security alone actually works. Not barely survives, works. Not because they're trendy, not because they're growing, but because they were forgotten. While everyone chased big cities, these places stayed quiet. Rents didn't explode. Life didn't speed up. On paper, retiring on Social Security sounds impossible, but on the ground, in certain overlooked towns, it still feels normal. A small place, a slow morning, coffee on a porch instead of a countdown to overdraft. Of course, there's a trade-off. There always is. These towns don't sell the dream. They don't advertise. They don't care if you come or not. And that's exactly why they still work. Today, we're breaking down 8 hidden American towns where you can realistically retire on Social Security alone. Places that feel like loopholes in a system that stopped caring a long time ago. Some are quiet to the point of discomfort. Some are beautiful in a way that feels accidental. And one of them might make you ask a dangerous question. Why am I still paying so much to live somewhere I barely enjoy? Number 1, Mountain View, Arkansas. At first glance, Mountain View feels like a place time quietly stepped around. Tucked deep in the Ozark Mountains, this town isn't trying to grow, impress, or reinvent itself. It exists at its own pace, slow, deliberate, and oddly reassuring. Mountain View is known as the folk music capital of the world, and that's not a marketing trick. On warm evenings, front porches turn into informal jam sessions. Fiddles, banjos, guitars. Not for tourists, not for money. Just because people here still do that. Life moves slowly enough that nobody apologizes for it. For retirees living on Social Security alone, the math here finally stops feeling hostile. Rent for a modest one-bedroom apartment commonly falls somewhere between $500 and $600 a month. Sometimes a little less if you know someone. Sometimes a little more if it's newly renovated, which usually just means newer carpet and fewer creaks. That range matters, because this is where a Social Security check stops gasping for air. You're not choosing between rent and groceries. You're not counting days until the next deposit. You're managing, calmly. The overall cost of living stays well below the national average, not because the town is broken, but because it never chased growth. Arkansas doesn't tax Social Security income at the state level, and that single fact quietly reshapes retirement here. Add senior homestead credits and low property taxes, and fixed income suddenly feels predictable again. Daily life is simple, grocery stores are small, restaurants close early. There's no traffic pattern to learn because there's barely traffic at all. Crime exists, but it's low enough that most danger comes from deer, not people. Doors get locked more out of habit than fear. But this town makes you pay in other ways. The internet is slow, not annoying, slow. Plan your life around it slow. Streaming can be an exercise in patience. Medical specialists usually mean a drive. Online shopping takes faith and extra days. And if convenience is your comfort blanket, Mountain View will take it away. Still, there's a trade most people don't expect. The quiet starts to feel expensive, in the best possible way. Picture this: morning light cutting through the trees, coffee on a porch that cost almost nothing to maintain. Somewhere nearby, someone practicing a fiddle, not performing, just passing time, no schedule, no notifications, no pressure to optimize anything. Mountain View isn't exciting, it isn't modern, and it definitely isn't flexible. But if retirement to you means calm instead of motion, and your budget demands honesty instead of hype, this town does something rare. It makes Social Security feel sufficient, not embarrassing. The real question is this: could you give up speed, options, and convenience if it meant never feeling financially hunted again? Because if Mountain View feels quiet, the next town proves just how far isolation can go. Number 2. Ely, Nevada. This city feels like a town that was supposed to disappear, and then didn't. Sitting high in eastern Nevada, surrounded by empty highways and more sky than seems reasonable, Ely exists in a kind of geographic pause. You don't pass through it by accident. You arrive here on purpose or because you ran out of road. At first glance, Ely looks rough around the edges. Old mining scars, faded storefronts, a railroad museum that feels more lived in than curated. This is not a place that sells charm. It earns it slowly. For retirees living on Social Security alone, Ely's biggest advantage is blunt and unromantic. The numbers still cooperate. Rent for a modest one-bedroom apartment often falls between $500 and $650 a month. Small houses, especially older ones, can sometimes rent for not much more than that. There's no bidding war, no rush, no sense that you're competing with anyone. Nevada doesn't tax Social Security income, no state income tax at all. That absence matters here more than anywhere flashy. It means what hits your account is what you actually get to use. Combined with a cost of living well below the national average, Ely becomes one of those rare places where a fixed income stops feeling like a shrinking one. Daily life is practical. Groceries are basic. Gas stations double as social hubs. The hospital is small but functional, and for many routine needs, it's enough. Crime stays low, not because of heavy policing, but because there's very little anonymity. People notice things here, and they notice people. But Ely doesn't pretend to be easy. Winters are long and unapologetic. Snow isn't decorative. It's a season-long commitment. Wind cuts through layers. Roads close without drama. And if you're used to quick access to specialists, entertainment, or variety, this town will feel like a test. Isolation isn't a side effect here. It's the feature. There's no mall to wander, no delivery culture. Internet speeds are workable, not generous. If you want something specific, you either plan ahead or decide you don't actually need it. Ely teaches you that lesson quickly. Still, there's a strange calm that settles in once you stop resisting it. Picture this: cold morning air, steam rising from a mug as you step outside, mountains holding the horizon in every direction. No traffic noise, no urgency, just space, physical and mental, stretching as far as you can see. Ely isn't cozy. It isn't scenic in a postcard way, and it doesn't care if you stay. But if your priority is affordability without humiliation, a place where Social Security pays the bills without apology, Ely offers something rare. Not comfort, control. So the question becomes simple and uncomfortable. Could you live with less access, fewer choices, and long winters if it meant your money finally stopped running your life? Because if Ely feels remote, the next town proves that isolation can still come with beauty and a very different kind of quiet. Number 3, Chama, New Mexico. Chama feels like the end of the road in a way that's almost deliberate. Perched in the mountains of northern New Mexico, this is a railroad town that never tried to become anything else. The trains still run, the pace never changed, and the silence here isn't empty. It's settled. At first glance, Chama looks picturesque in a quiet, forgotten way. Old storefronts, wooden porches, a main street that feels like it's waiting for someone who isn't coming. Tourists pass through in the summer for the scenic railroad, then vanish. What's left is the real town. For retirees living on Social Security alone, Chama works for one simple reason: housing never left reality behind. Rent for a modest apartment or small house often lands between $500 and $700 a month, sometimes less if the place is older. sometimes more if it has mountain views and fewer drafts. But the key difference is this: prices here aren't chasing anyone. The cost of living stays well below the national average, and while New Mexico technically taxes Social Security, most lower-income retirees end up paying very little in practice. State deductions, credits, and low overall expenses soften the impact enough that the monthly math still works, especially compared to states where rent alone eats everything. Daily life in Chama is minimal by design. There's a grocery store, a few diners, and not much else. Medical care is basic locally, with larger hospitals requiring a drive. Crime is low enough that it barely enters conversation. Not because it's perfect, but because there's nothing here that attracts chaos. But Chama doesn't hide its costs. Winter is long and serious. Snow isn't charming after the first week. Roads can close. Isolation becomes real, not theoretical. Internet access is serviceable but unreliable, and cell reception depends heavily on where you're standing. Convenience is something you drive toward, not expect. Social life takes effort. You don't stumble into friends here. You earn them slowly through repetition, presence, and patience. If you need constant stimulation, Chama will feel suffocating. Yet, for the right person, the quiet becomes a kind of luxury. Picture this: early morning frost on wooden steps, coffee steaming in thin mountain air, a train whistle echoing through the valley, slow and distant. No rush, no pressure, just time unfolding at its own speed. Chama isn't lively, it isn't polished, and it won't adapt to you. But if your version of retirement values space over access, calm over convenience, and a budget that finally behaves, this town offers something rare. A life where your Social Security check covers the basics, and the rest of your day is yours. The question is simple: could you live somewhere this quiet, this remote, and this unchanged, if it meant peace without financial anxiety? Because if Chama feels still, the next town reminds you what real winters and real resilience actually look like. Number 4, Ironwood, Michigan. It hits you with cold, distance, and silence right up front, and then waits to see if you flinch. Sitting in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, right on the edge of Wisconsin, Ironwood feels more like a survival town than a retirement town. Long winters, heavy snow, pine trees that block the wind just enough to remind you how bad it could be. This isn't a place people accidentally move to. It's a place they choose after they've decided what they actually need. For retirees living on Social Security alone, Ironwood works because it never joined the modern housing race. Rent for a modest one-bedroom apartment commonly falls between $500 and $650 a month. Small homes, real houses, not condos, sometimes rent for only slightly more. Buying can still be shockingly reasonable by national standards, especially if you're willing to shovel your own driveway for half the year. Michigan does not tax Social Security income, and that matters more here than it sounds. Combined with low housing costs and senior property tax relief programs, Ironwood becomes one of those rare places where a fixed income doesn't feel like a countdown clock. Daily life is stripped down and practical. Groceries are affordable. Restaurants are simple. People don't rush because there's nowhere to rush to. Crime is low, partly because there's little incentive for it, and partly because everyone notices when something feels off. The loudest disturbances are usually snowplows or the occasional black bear getting curious, but Ironwood collects its payment in weather. Winter isn't a season here, it's a lifestyle. Snow piles up, not inches, feet. Roads narrow. Cars struggle. Your world shrinks to what you can reach safely. If you hate cold, Ironwood will wear you down quickly. If you fear isolation, it will test you. Internet access exists, but don't expect miracles. Medical care is adequate for routine needs, but specialized treatment usually means travel, and spontaneity disappears once snow becomes a daily negotiation. Still, there's something grounding about life here. Picture this: early morning light reflecting off snow-covered pines, your breath visible in the air, coffee warming your hands before the day even begins. No noise except wind and the crunch of boots on packed snow. The world feels paused, not broken, just quiet. Ironwood isn't comfortable, it isn't convenient, and it definitely isn't gentle. But if retirement to you means affordability without humiliation, a place where Social Security covers rent, heat, and food without apology, Ironwood delivers something rare, not ease, stability. So here's the real question: could you live with cold, long winters and fewer options if it meant never worrying about rent again? Because if Ironwood feels intense, the next town proves that desert isolation comes with its own kind of pressure. Number 5, Fallon, Nevada. Fallon feels like a place the desert agreed to tolerate. Flat, wide, and sun-bleached, this town sits an hour east of Reno, far enough away to avoid city pressure, close enough to remind you what you're not missing. Military jets cut across the sky some days. Other days, nothing moves at all. At first glance, Fallon looks ordinary, almost aggressively so. Chain stores, wide roads, single-story homes. No drama, no pretension. And that plainness is exactly why it works. For retirees living on Social Security alone, Fallon's appeal comes down to one thing: the housing never lost its mind. Rent for a modest one-bedroom apartment typically falls between $600 and $750 a month. Older homes and smaller units can dip lower, especially outside the newest developments. You won't find luxury towers here. You also won't find landlords acting like they're doing you a favor. Nevada's lack of state income tax does a lot of heavy lifting. Social Security stays untouched. No state deductions, no quiet surprises. When combined with a cost of living below the national average, that single policy turns Fallon into a place where fixed income starts to feel predictable again. Daily life is practical and slightly utilitarian. Grocery stores are affordable. Gas is easy to get. Medical care is solid for a town this size, helped by the nearby Naval Air Station and regional facilities. Crime stays relatively low, and most of it is the kind that comes with boredom, not desperation. But Fallon has its own price. The desert is unforgiving. Summers are hot in a way that doesn't apologize. Wind carries dust. Shade becomes strategy. And if greenery matters to you, this town will feel emotionally beige. Entertainment is limited. Dining options repeat quickly. And if you're looking for culture, you'll be driving. There's also the sound: jets, training flights, sudden noise that reminds you this town exists because of something bigger than it. Some people find it unsettling. Others stop noticing after a while. Still, there's a quiet competence to life here. Picture this: early morning light stretching across open land, coffee on a small patio, the air still cool before the heat sets in, no rush to be anywhere, no pressure to spend money just to exist. Fallon isn't charming. It isn't scenic in a romantic way, and it won't entertain you. But if your version of retirement values stability over stimulation, and a place where Social Security pays rent without drama, Fallon does something rare. It stays out of your way. So the question becomes this: could you live somewhere plain, hot, and a little loud, if it meant your finances finally stopped being? Because if Fallon feels exposed, the next town shows what happens when isolation meets history and refuses to move on. Number 6, Walsenburg, Colorado. This city feels like a town that missed its exit and never bothered to turn back. Sitting at the edge of southern Colorado, where the plains start breaking into mountains, this is a former coal town that outlived the industry that built it. What's left is quiet, wide streets, and a town that learned how to survive without attention. At first glance, Walsenburg looks worn, brick buildings from another era, empty storefronts that never got replaced, a downtown that feels paused mid-sentence. But beneath that surface is something retirees notice immediately. For people living on Social Security alone, Walsenburg still plays by older financial rules. Rent for a modest one-bedroom apartment often falls between $550 and $700 a month. Small houses, especially older ones, can sometimes rent for only slightly more. There's no frenzy here, no bidding wars, no sense that prices are racing towards something unsustainable. Colorado does tax Social Security for higher income retirees, but many people living primarily on Social Security fall below the thresholds that trigger meaningful state tax. Add in relatively low property values and senior exemptions, and the monthly math stays manageable, not generous, but workable. Daily life in Walsenburg is understated. Grocery options are limited but affordable. Medical care exists locally for routine needs, with larger hospitals an hour or so away. Crime is low enough that it rarely defines the conversation. Most problems here come from neglect, not danger. But Walsenburg asks for patience. The economy is slow. Jobs are scarce. Growth isn't coming to save anyone. If you're expecting revitalization, you'll be disappointed. Internet service works, but it's inconsistent. Winters bring cold and wind. Summers are dry and intense. This town doesn't soften itself for comfort. Social life requires effort. Entertainment doesn't appear on demand. And if you rely on variety, in food, people, or experiences, Walsenburg can feel confining. Still, there's a strange dignity here. Picture this: late afternoon light hitting the Spanish peaks in the distance, a quiet street, a front porch that's seen decades of lives come and go, no pressure to consume, no expectation to keep up. Walsenburg isn't polished, it isn't growing, and it doesn't pretend otherwise. But if retirement to you means lowering your financial noise, not chasing excitement, this town offers something most places no longer can: affordability that hasn't been optimized out of existence. So the question is simple: could you live in a place that isn't improving if it meant your expenses finally stopped improving too? Because if Walsenburg feels still, the next town proves that even deeper quiet can feel strangely welcoming. Number 7. Valentine, Nebraska. Valentine feels like a town that exists between decisions, not rushing forward, not falling apart, just sitting quietly in the middle of the Nebraska sandhills, surrounded by more grass than people and more sky than seems necessary. At first glance, Valentine looks almost too simple. One main drag, a handful of diners, pickup trucks parked like they've been there all day, because they probably have. This isn't a town built for ambition, it's built for staying. For retirees living on Social Security alone, Valentine works because the fundamentals never broke. Rent for a modest one-bedroom apartment commonly falls between $500 and $600 a month. Small houses can rent for a bit more, but still well within reach of a fixed income. Buying remains possible too, not as a fantasy, but as a realistic option if you've held on to some savings. Nebraska does tax Social Security, which sounds like a deal breaker until you look closer. Property tax relief programs for seniors, homestead exemptions, and local assistance soften the blow enough that most low-income retirees aren't getting crushed. The real advantage here is that housing costs stay low enough to absorb what taxes take away. Daily life is predictable in a way that feels intentional. Grocery stores are small but adequate. Healthcare is basic locally, with larger hospitals requiring a drive. Crime is low, not because it's aggressively policed, but because everyone notices unfamiliar patterns. In a town this size, anonymity doesn't last long. But Valentine isn't stimulating. Entertainment options are thin, restaurants repeat quickly, winters bring cold and wind that doesn't negotiate. And if you need constant movement or variety, this town will start to feel narrow. Yet there's something quietly generous about the pace. Picture this: morning light rolling across open prairie, coffee on a porch with nothing scheduled, deer moving through tall grass behind your house like they've always done. No traffic noise, no urgency, just space. Valentine isn't exciting, it isn't modern, and it won't try to be. But if retirement to you means breathing room, financial and mental, this town offers something rare: a place where Social Security covers the basics and leaves you alone the rest of the day. So here's the honest question: could you trade stimulation and convenience for calm and affordability, and actually be okay with that? Because if Valentine feels sparse, the final town proves that even colder, quieter places can still make the numbers work. If you look at these towns on a map, none of them jump out. They don't trend. They don't market themselves. They don't promise reinvention. Mountain View slows life down to a human pace. Ely gives you control instead of comfort. Chama trades convenience for silence. Ironwood proves stability can survive brutal winters. None of these places are perfect. Each one charges a price in weather, isolation, limited options, or boredom. But that's the trade most cities stopped offering. Because the truth is uncomfortable. Retiring on Social Security alone isn't impossible.